you, Ali. And thank you again, Vanessa, for providing an in-depth analysis of the difficult choices families must deal with due to the impact of climate change on women in Tanzanian communities. My name is Yinka Oyelowo, and I am a national board member for the Voice of Women for Peace. And I'm also a human rights lawyer practicing at Franklin Law in Toronto, Ontario. My presentation focuses on the research-based solutions that we can create by educating African women and communities about how to manage the devastating effects of climate change. First, I will examine qualitative and quantitative research highlighting the negative macroeconomic impacts of climate change and the consequent burden on public education, peace, and security. Next slide, please. Agriculture in developing countries across Africa and the Middle East suffer immensely from increases in temperature. For example, Africa's slow economic growth in the 1980s and in the 1990s has been linked to historically low precipitation. Communities that rely on agriculture as their main source of livelihood are vulnerable to poverty and famine. And one recent example that has shocked the world are the massive swarms of locusts and severe floods threatening East Africa's food supply. Next slide, please. Academic research shows that by the year 2050, African countries will sustain a permanent temperature increase of approximately 2 degrees Celsius to 5 degrees Celsius. We need to translate this research into action because the World Health Organization has highlighted that educating women is a lifeline to development and sustainable development. For example, educating African women about what crops survive in specific temperatures will have a direct impact on access to food, health, safety, and mortality rates in relation to poverty. The current global response to the threat of climate change is insufficient because there is no clear plan as to how green climate action funds will directly impact communities in Africa. Next slide, please. A Harvard University research paper called Temperature Test Scores in Human Capital Production indicates that heat exposure affects educational performance in both the short and long run. So taking an exam on a 90-degree Fahrenheit day relative to a 72-degree Fahrenheit day results in a reduction in exam performance. It also results in a reduction in human capital production in terms of agriculture. Next slide, please. Peace and security is also threatened by temperature increases, which directly affect the lives of women. Studies have shown that an increase in violence correlates with higher temperatures. For example, in Tanzania, a study from 2005 showed that temperature increases resulted in an increase in witch murders, which is specifically violence against women. Next slide. So gender inequalities are actually exacerbated by violence correlated with the negative consequences of climate change. At the village level, there are higher instances of violence against women due to poverty and lack of access to food and income. At the regional level, a 1990s study shows that the higher temperatures resulted in more riots and battles across East Africa. And at the country level, higher temperatures have resulted in increased civil war risk across sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide, please. In order to build resilient African communities that can stand the changes, the negative impacts of climate change, the key path for improved climate action is to educate women about how to deal with climate changes resulting in loss of food, security, and educational opportunities. When we invest in women's education about climate change, we invest in the health and safety of African communities. So how do we build a sustainable and resilient African community focused on education, health, and the well-being of all Africans amidst rapid climate change? The key pathways for improved climate change adaptation in Africa include investing in affordable and effective interventions to reduce the burden of mortality and disability. So like I've mentioned before, educating women on which crops can withstand the changes in temperature. Our goal is to reduce the burden of mortality and disability by empowering women with access to information. Empowering women through education is a powerful way to combat climate change. So I want to appeal to you today to please donate to the African Climate Action Initiative to help fight fight climate change in African communities by educating and empowering women to build sustainable communities in Africa. Thank you.